Sure. All right. Hi, everyone. We are excited today to have our guest speaker. And just for your benefit, Tom, we'll go around the horn and introduce ourselves, and then we'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself, and then roll right into your thoughts or your what comes to your mind when you think about quality assurance in higher education. All right, so let's start with Barbara.
I was hoping you wouldn't start with me. I never know which things to include. So my name is Barbara Leach. I'm interim vice president of instruction at Kishwaukee College. We went through our last HLC accreditation in 2018, I think. So we're working on that midpoint assurance argument right now. So I'm excited to hear from you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
All right, next we'll go to Jamie.
Hi. Okay, just so you know my inner table, so you might have to turn off my cam in a minute. I work at Elgin Community College, I guess east from Barbara, and we are on I think it's interim report on assessment for HLC for next year. So that's where our institution is, and I'm excited to hear from you today.
Great. Thanks. Nice to meet you.
Marky?
I am the non-Chicagoan in the group. I'm at the University of Tulsa, and I am an assessment and evaluation specialist for academic programs here. We are in our mid-cycle review, and I'm also the assurance argument coordinator. So it's busy here.
It is, and I'll be seeing you in February.
And next week we've got Zoom.
Oh, I think it's Thursday. I
Thursday.
think it's Thursday. Yeah,
Yes.
I do a training for the university. Yeah.
Nice. And Paul?
I'm Paul Jensen. I'm the Associate Vice President of Academic Innovation and Workforce Education at Triton College. And we have our reaffirmation coming up in February of 24. So we're in the middle of doing our preparations for that.
Terrific. And you kind of went out on me. It could be my internet, Paul, but where are you? Trident, did you say?
Oh, Triton Community College.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, Tom, take it away.
Just a little bit about myself, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, Joe, this class is primarily, what type of folks are in it? Only higher ed folks, or some?
We have some K-12 folks.
Okay.
Yeah, we have some K-12.
All right. So I have a K-12 background. That's where I started, and thought I was going to end up there, but I didn't. And we had, back in the day, they did a lot of let's just say grants where you can work with higher ed, because they wanted a seamless transition, of which we've never really achieved. But we've been talking about it for 100 years. But they gave us some money, and I thought, well, that's a good idea. I'd like to try that. And so that's when I left P12 and went into higher ed, because the people in higher ed liked working with me so much. They'd said, why don't you apply to be a professor? And so I did. And then that's kind of, put the nail in the coffin, and that's where I've been ever since. So, I did the typical thing that you do, published and presented and lived a professor's life. It was probably the best life I've ever had. And I say that looking back on the life now, I say, I wish I would have known I was that happy at the time. And looking back, I'm glad I was able to live it. And it was about 11 years of really kind of doing anything I wanted. And it was back before, the feds really got involved in things. And accreditation was very different. Accreditation was, kind of top down, and that was not, professors were not pretty much involved in that part of it. We did a few little projects we'd put in a portfolio, and we'd stuck it in a room, and maybe they looked at it, maybe they didn't. We didn't really care. And so we just had this really great life, and went on with things. And then things started to change. The role of professor changed, students changed, and over time I found myself gravitating toward, different roles. And so I worked in higher ed admin, and then after that, then into working in government and policy at the federal, state, local levels. Worked for two different governors. Both governors, one was a Republican, one was a Democrat. How I retained my job was I just simply changed my party affiliation so I could keep my job. That created a problem at home. I didn't have dinner served to me for a couple weeks after that, but I learned a lot, and just slowly I just really opened up to more policy work. I found that to be really, really fascinating. And realizing that this country is really being held together by a thread. And it really is, just because we all agree that this is a good way to do things. And it's, it was very scary back then, because I would watch rules and laws being made, and I didn't understand how bad the sausage making is. But when I left there, I was well prepared. And of course, that opens you up for big career moves, and worked at Woodrow Wilson Fellowship Foundation at Princeton University, became a scholar at the Ohio State University, and then was tapped really to come to Chicago to take a vice presidency role here. And it was the right decision. I'm glad I did it. And I learn new things every day in this job, because now I get to work with 131 institutions. And in the role that I have at the agency, I also, I don't know what the title is that goes with it, but, oversees or manages the sub-change process from the vice president level. So that puts me directly, in line with all the institutions that we have at HLC. And then watching how accreditation has changed over the years, and being there in 2020 during the Trump administration, and the rules that changed there, has really put us in line with understanding where the government is now going. And I think that's would be the most helpful piece of this class, is that I can bring to you some of that perspective. And the future is going to be very different. And once again, I had wonderful parents who taught me change is going to happen. You can't spend time, saying, I don't want to change, or I don't like the changes that are coming. You embrace it, and you find a role in it. Otherwise, you will be left behind, and you don't want to be left behind. So I've managed that way, and it's been really good advice. And we're in one of those now, more so than I think ever before in my career.
Thanks, Tom. So when you think about, given your perspective, because I've only known more the latest higher ed quality assurance landscape since the feds have stepped in. But how much of, like, back when you were a professor, and when you think about quality in education, how much of your definition for that has been retained now, versus how different is it now?
Yeah, I think back in the day when I was teaching, good professors were always sought out by students. So when you thought you were good, the students would really let you know informally. And then when we put out, the formal stuff, it was no surprise to me that students liked my class. In order to make a really quality class as a professor, what I tried to do was put myself in their shoes. I was young enough to do that. And I made a class that I thought would be valuable to them, but also make them stay awake. It was 3.5 hour graduate class. I mean, that's just hard to do, right? How can this be both? Because learning should be fun, and we should carry that through in everything we do, whether it's mathematics or anything else. And the best professors are those like, the science guy. He's entertaining, but yet there's a lot of stuff back there, right? There's a lot of facts. What we didn't do, which is what's being called on now, is to take everything we're doing apart, make goals out of it, right? And then collect data over time. And that's just not something we did. So when you ask about what's changed is, and we still don't know if this is going to work, but certainly what has changed is there's just a general understanding, right or wrong, that in order to scale up the quality of education, we need to parse out what we do into smaller chunks and be able to provide some level of data. Right now, it's overly quantitative as far as I'm concerned, because I'm a qualitative researcher. But it's hard to scale up qualitative research, and so I get that. But right now, every institution I go to, they'll show me scores and means and standard deviations and what have yous. I think that's fine, but the fact of the matter is the quality is really not in the professor. The quality is being demanded from above, and it's being put onto the professor today, not so much as because we didn't, today you have to provide us data as an accreditor, and the data has to signify that you have demonstrated that students learn. When I was teaching, it didn't really matter if they didn't learn, because if you didn't attend and you didn't participate, then you didn't learn, you didn't get a good grade, and everybody knew about it, and that was just kind of your lot in life. That was your decision, but it certainly wasn't the professor's responsibility to ensure that you learn. That's all changed. And there is a general understanding now in the country, and then certainly it's being driven by government, that outcomes are it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we could spend a lot of time talking about those pieces too. And but one thing I do want to latch onto that you said, and it goes both to what your parents told you, as well as you were talking about the way you've been talking about kind of the state of affairs now, is that I think it's something I try and do in my day job as well, is there isn't a ton of use aside from when there's open comment periods and times when entities are collecting feedback. But when rules come out, when policies come out, it doesn't do us much good to fight them, right? Or to complain we don't like it, or to dwell on the fact that I don't like this new policy that came out, right? We have to embrace it and move forward and find the best way, that if we view it as a hindrance, a barrier, an annoyance, whatever, that we find the best way to navigate through that. But I feel like there can be a lot of hand-wringing and a lot of energy spent on, well, I don't like this, and this doesn't seem fair, when a lot of that energy would be better spent thinking about, okay, so how can we work with this, right? Because we can't predict or fight if the feds come in and audit us. We can't predict and fight if HLC then looks at our faculty credentials and says, these people are not qualified, so you didn't deliver them the bad news, but we can. Right? It's like they're not qualified to teach. So I do think that's an important thing, and I'm glad you mentioned it too, because I think one of the things too that, especially as they're learning about the triad, is there's an assumption that the triad is very kumbaya, everybody working together, everyone on the same page, when in fact that isn't always the case. And that it can be, right, and sometimes we can lean on one another, but sometimes we're also beholden to, if this is what the feds say, this is what the feds say, and we have to then kind of do our part to hold up the leg of the stool and keep things moving forward.
Yeah, and we're just not in a good space right now as a country to be able to tell our federal government, which represents our people. We're just not in a good space with the data that's in front of them. The American people see $3 trillion in debt. And what did we get for it? Right? That's the question. And if we're going to forgive some of that debt, then why? And so all of these big questions lead us to a space where we don't come to the table with an equal argument. We have a lot of schools that were found out to do some shady things that were either shut down or shut down them by themselves, or we instituted that, but only to find out that a lot of these students took out student loans and they have to pay that back for the rest of their lives, So this is heavy stuff, heavy stuff.
Yeah.
And the numbers are staggering. I mean, we're seeing data that really makes us stand up and take notice. So let me just throw this out. HLC was quite aware that there's going to be a shift in 2027, because it was very clear that there were some times in which couples just did not want to have babies. And we knew that was coming, and they call it an enrollment cliff, right? So you save up for that. Well, enrollment cliff also means for HLC, we're not going to have the same income, because we bill by student and by institution. So, if the institution is shrinking in size, so is the bill. And if the students are shrinking in size per student, then that's, less that we have to. So we knew that was coming. But some staggering things have happened over the past 5 years that was presented to the board. That was a surprise to me, that we lost over 2 million students in the last 5 years. Now, that enrollment cliff does not explain that. And we all have to spend time and ask ourselves whether or not, in fact, we don't know why. I mean, we don't have any data on that. We can't go out and interview people who didn't sign up for college and say why. But say, for instance, we don't know why, but maybe let's make something up. Let's just say, I don't think I want to go to school because I'm not really sure it's a good value for my investment. And if that word is getting out already before the enrollment cliff, where does that put higher education right now? So if that trend is true, and if that's the reason, which we don't know, but let's just take that and say it is, what do we do? Are we in a space right now that we have to advocate not only for the quality, but we have to advocate that it's to come? Whether it's quality or not, you got to show up. Why are you not here? And you look at the new generation of students. I look at all of you. I mean, I'm older than you, but not terribly much. But if you look at the new students today, the younger students, why are they not going? I'm sure you're still part of a generation. For all of you have really great resumes. There was something that told you, in order to have a better life, you're going to go to college, you're going to do these kind of things. That's maybe not what the message is today.
Yeah. One thing you touched on that I know has been, it came up a couple times, as people were looking across external quality assurance entities, with programmatic, state, institutional accreditors, but also thinking about how external quality assurance can look in other countries and how there can be like a Ministry of Education, and that kind of does the bulk of the work for that country. One of the questions that came up was the idea of cost, and what does that mean? Some of the students were pointing out that it seems like institutions that are more financially stable or have more resources could afford to have more programmatic accreditation, more, external quality assurance entities that they participate in. And so it's just a big question folks had, and I'd be curious your thoughts from HLC's perspective of, how you all determine costs for fees to keep your doors open, but then also be, fair for institutions of all types.
Yeah, I mean, let's just take the word quality, right? I think if I think about what I do all day in my job, I do very, very little, very, very few conversations have to do with a quality issue. I'd say 90% of the role I do all day is about compliance. And so if we as a country have decided that quality is a measure of, dear Lord, are you even in compliance? And if that's really what we're doing, I mean, that's really what I'm doing, then, I would argue that the word quality is being watered down quite a bit, right? And we have institutions with, these criteria are not difficult. The criteria for accreditation are not difficult. Our assumed practices are not difficult. Our obligations of membership are quite clear. And it's not the end of the world, right? Federal compliance is much more difficult, I think, as of 2020. And Joe, we've worked on that. And there's still a lot of institutions who have no idea what I'm talking about. No clue. And every time, Joe, I can tell you, when I'm asked to go out to do a presentation or any kind of interaction on the campus with faculty, I can guarantee you they look at me like I have 3 heads and they've never heard any of the stuff I'm talking about.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And so I think, I think we have to ask ourselves, oh my goodness, there's even schools that can't meet this, right? There are schools that are on the list that clearly are not meeting the standards, which we don't call them that, we call them criteria, but they are standards, right? Mm-hmm. There's a roadmap for quality. And so, you all are educators, or you work around education, even if you didn't teach, but you're in an education environment. In education, this is so true. We spend the majority of our time with the slow learner, right? And this happens even in other parts of working, and it certainly does happen here. And there are some institutions that are really struggling, and I'm touching base with them once, twice, sometimes 3 times a week. And it's not clear as to whether or not this is going to work. And this could drag on for years or decades. And, then I have other institutions I rarely see. And, they don't really ask me any quality questions, but they blow me away when I read their assurance argument. And we don't have any way to, I mean, if you go online and you say, okay, HLC, is this accredited? Yes or no? And in most cases, it's accredited with some sort of, blemish. a pimple of some sort, something that requires a Band-Aid that other people can see, right? And then there are those who clearly are, you know, being notified to both parents and students that they have significant problems. And those have to now be made public, and still students continue to come and not really understand what that means.
Yeah.
So when you're asking about quality, I'd love if my job could actually be about having a discussion with a group of faculty to see whether or not the outcomes of their learning outcomes and the data that they're providing is crap or not.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's one of the things I've talked about in this class and that I talk about on campus is that you know, no offense to HLC, but in a lot of ways that's the bar, right? I mean, to meet, like you said, to meet the criteria shouldn't be hard. And so when we get our report back and it says like meets across the board, yes, there's some celebrating to be done of we went through this process, but there are also very real quality concerns that we were addressing in order to prepare for the visit, right? That we still need to address as an institution. But unfortunately, there are people who will look at accreditors and say, well, because they didn't find it or they didn't cite it, it must not be a problem. And so we can leave it alone or we can ignore it until, you know, it bubbles up again. But Paul, I see your hand's been raised, so I'll see what you
no, thanks. You're touching on a lot of issues that we've got at our college, and I've got just a couple of questions about them. One is just dealing with the whole quality issue in general. We've got we have faculty, new faculty that we hire, and we kind of have to teach them about assessment because they come in not really understanding assessment, or they think assessment is just using the grade book. And you know, we grade their quizzes, we give them exams, so that's assessment. We're done. And I just kind of wonder, you know, if we can teach the scientific method in elementary school and K-12, can't we teach the assessment cycle in K-12? Can't we introduce people to this a little bit earlier instead of just waiting until they're professional educators? Because it would be helpful if people kind of understood this. I can't imagine it wouldn't be helpful to everybody to kind of know what we're talking about with assessment. But that's just kind of an aside. But you mentioned kind of the issues that we've got with teaching to the lower half of the class. And that takes a tremendous amount of time, especially in the community colleges. Our district is last I checked, it was the second poorest in Illinois. And we do spend a lot of time, our faculties, you know, they're always concentrating on the lower part of the curve. And it costs us, the upper half of the curve is going to transfer to College of DuPage. When they notice that most of the class is spent focusing on the essential parts of the lecture that they got in the first 10 minutes of the class. It's a real challenge for our faculty. And when we talk about all the stuff that they need to be doing with assessment, they get a little tired about those things, and they just talk about all the work that they have to do working with the students that are coming into the class. And you know, we have high school districts that are challenged and sending these students along to us, and their teachers are tired too. It's just kind of a cycle that we just have to work with. But I'm going on and on about this because now I'm working my way over to differentiated accreditation. I came here from Northwestern University, where, you know, we kind of used to laugh. They had a best of everything for their accreditation offices. You know, they had fleets of people that would go out and work with the faculty and the staff when it was time for accreditation visits. And you know, they could throw money at the issue. They had people that could teach you how to write the reports, how to do the reports. They had the you know, libraries of anything that you needed how to do. If I had any question, I'd have, you know, 2 or 3 people would be able to answer my question, give me examples, and make appointments to show me how to do it. I don't have anything like that in the community college. You know, it's you get the assistance as you can get the assistance, and then you've been welcome to the trainer. Now that you know how to do it, go forth and train others how to do it, right? And that's how we keep everybody going. with differentiated accreditation, I keep thinking, well, the universities are going to be able to fly through this, right? Because they've got those large staffs of accreditors. And is there going to be an equity issue with some of these institutions that are just going to be able to zip along? As long as they're doing it, maybe that isn't going to be an issue. But it's just something that in my college we were talking about. The peer reviewer for my college has been involved with a lot of those discussions at HLC, and we kind of pepper her with those questions. And she's good with her answers. But I told her I was going to be in a meeting with you, and she said, "Oh, you're going to have one of the big dogs there. You get to ask them yourself." So I'm asking you.
Well, she probably knows more than I do. So this dog isn't that big. You touched on a couple things, right? That leads up to it, and we probably should at least look at that piece of it. Assessment is a big issue. It continues to be the one in which people either have monitoring or they find themselves in some sort of notice or probation, and you know, God forbid, show cause. But one of the problems we face, which is what exactly you're saying, is we need an education on assessment, right? The teachers who are teaching and people who have gone through a school, whether it's in higher ed or in P12, are used to assessment. And they're used to using the term, and they know they're being assessed. And so their vision of assessment has nothing at all to do with what we're asking. So we're using the same term to describe something in which they believe they know what you're talking about, but they don't. They really don't. Because HLC is not interested or in the business of, nor will we ever be in the classroom to determine whether or not the assessment you're doing to the student is of any value. That's up to you to figure out. What we are interested in, though, is whether or not the programs that you offer are able to talk about the outcomes in terms of learning, and that we call assessment. And that's the disconnect, because that is a meta term and the faculty are at the micro term. And they believe that I showed you all this stuff. I do all this stuff. I have grades. I have portfolios. I have rubrics. I have, you know, I have after dinner drinks I can show you. What is the problem? Why do you not get? I mean, I don't understand why you keep asking me for things. And then when we do train them and we tell them what we're interested in, the second level of problem is, I don't have time for that. I don't see that as my responsibility. I'm an individual faculty member. I need a contractual arrangement for that or what have you. Doesn't somebody else do that? Tell me what it is you want. And we have to change the dialogue here. And so when you talk about differentiated, I think what our goal is, and I may be speaking out of turn, even though I'm on the committee at some level, but at least my understanding of it is based on the fact that I am on the assessment committee who knows that there's an assessment problem. So I can tell you what I'm saying is true. And you know it to be true because you all do this work. And you know how hard it is, how easy it comes for nursing and education and business. It becomes so difficult in English, math, some of the sciences, and so on and so forth. So philosophy professors, forget it. We're eons away from them understanding, right, the piece here that we're looking for. Because in their term, you know, learning is, and they'll give you all sorts of reasons why even the terms we're using, you know, that came from Greek aren't even being used correctly. So after you're done with all of that conversation, we have to ask ourselves, does one size fit all? And I think we're at a space in which, at least, to give a concrete example, assessment might change depending on the type of institution you are. And if it's anything like Ohio State, where I worked, and the University of Chicago, which is one of my schools, I can tell you this is not a problem for them. And it's not a problem because yes, they have tons of folks that do this kind of stuff, but they also live in an atmosphere of inquiry and the luxury to be a school in which they can choose the students they want and the faculty that are top notch. So you're at a very different disadvantage there if you're trying to compare yourself to an Apple and a radial tire, right? And so I think what we don't want to do is water it down. So, hey, you're a community college, you're not as good as University of Chicago. That's not what we want. However, are we in fact asking the right questions? In community colleges, as you know, we do short-term learning experiences. Is it realistic to have a bunch of data that would indicate that, you know, that's as good as something that takes 120 credits to get through, where the data can be far richer because you have a longer period of time to know whether or not the learning is happening over time? So I think these are big questions. And so I think you'll like what you're going to see. Now, no one's ever going to love everything that HLC provides them, including me. But I do think the conversations have been rich. They have been honest. One of the things from a community college perspective that I think you'll grab onto, which was shocking to me, this community college president looked at us and said, you know, HLC comes to do a visit for us, but half of what we do, you don't even know about. That was sobering. Because if we're an accreditor of an institution and we are not looking at 50% of what the programs are, maybe we're not looking at the right thing, and maybe this is the time we stand back and say, all right, how can we do this differently? I can tell you for a fact, some of the conversations I've heard, I have really liked. The direction they're going. They recognize 4B as a problem. How do we make it so that it can be embedded in something that faculty will understand, faculty do? It's not an add-on, right? And they can see this as a quality marker. And I think that's what's driving the conversation now. So let me give you an example of what that might be. I mean, I don't know, but I'm making this up. But what if we stop saying, you know, 4B is a thing, but assessment is a process that's expected as part of program quality?
Yeah.
If we do it that way, whether you're a community college or Northwestern, then it becomes a little bit more of a, you know, the philosophy, you know, right now, the way it is, if philosophy doesn't do it, then you're not all doing it, and then you get dinged and the whole place goes down. But what if we use this as a quality marker for program outcomes to demonstrate that your program, the students in your program are learning? And then that way, if there are places where that evidence doesn't seem to line up, we call that out, but we don't say the whole institution is crap. So the good news is, you know, I think what's coming is not a minor review. I think it will be. The last time we reviewed, and as you know, we're required by code and by law by our own policies as well, to review our criteria every 5 years. And we're coming up on our 5th year, 2025. And so therefore, when we did it prior to 2020, it was a small change. I'm not so sure it's going to be a small change this time. Now, will it change in terms of the markers that we continually look at? Probably not, because that hasn't changed since 1893. There's been nothing new in revelation, right? Since the early Greek times of quality. When I first took the job, the first thing my mentor told me to do is read the Chia book on the history of accreditation. It's a difficult one to get through, and it's thick, and it's written by a bunch of academics, not just one, so you can only imagine. But it's remarkably fun to look at in terms of history, because I saw an accreditation visit from 1905 or something, and it looked suspiciously like the one I just looked at.
Oh.
So what is the quality mark? Curriculum. Gee, do we look at that? Yeah, program review, substantive change, all that. Faculty qualifications. Are faculty coming from schools we know? Are faculty qualified to teach what they teach? What was the third one? Capacity. Do you have the capacity, staff support, all the things that are needed? Finances, right? And what was the last one? Governance, board structure, mission. Hasn't changed that much.
So when the people say, in a time like now, when we're supposed to be looking at innovative solutions to our educational problems, what does the HLC respond to, folks that say we want to do innovative things, but it doesn't fit within the structure of accreditation because accreditation doesn't necessarily allow for innovation?
But then I say, we've done innovative things when we've landed the man on the moon, and we had the same pretty much accreditation structure from, 1893. So I'm not sure we stand in the way. And even if you did something innovative, if you did something innovative, don't you want to demonstrate that it has good curriculum, good faculty? Is there anything in what I said that would say, well, that hinders innovation?
No, not what you said. I'm thinking about, Western governors. Some of the issues that we've gone through is we've had these big seismic shifts into different types of learning styles. John, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
I was just going to say, one of the things that we regularly go to Tom to talk about is, there are also pieces built in to HLC's processes and criteria of thresholds to allow you to pilot and start pretty innovative things. Because a good example is a big complaint that is regularly talked about with accreditation is we can't launch a new program, we can't launch this new innovative thing without getting approval, and approval takes so many months, and the market's now, and this partner's here now, and we want to do this now, and accreditation is holding us back. But as we've worked with Tom in a number of cases, there's a lot of things that you have a threshold. I mean, even competency-based education, you can get up to 50% of a program going
right
before you have to get it approved as a CBE program. Meaning, now this may not help like a community college because your time's shorter, but like a 4-year institution, that means you have 2 years to be running a program and seeking the approval at the same time. So this idea of accreditation holding you back, it's really more of how can you fit the accreditation pieces into your plan and into your process, and how can you know how much of a runway you have. And again, to Tom's point, it's a matter of just baking in these things. They're gonna look at your curriculum, they're gonna look at your qualifications. So starting from the point of these are the things we have to have our ducks in a row in order to do this as fast as possible. And the only other thing that I'd work in while I'm talking about this is I am shocked at the number of institutions who basically keep their accreditor at an arm's length because they feel like that's the best strategy. They feel like the accreditor is the enemy, the accreditor is only out to get them, and so they need to keep their cards close to the chest, and they should not talk to the accreditor about what they're trying to do for fear of getting in trouble or causing confusion. Whereas we have found time and time again, it is so much easier and more helpful to bring them in and say, these are the things we're thinking about. We're worried about this. We're worried about that. Because oftentimes Tom's like, well, why don't you just do this? You can avoid that whole mess if you just did this. Or you're right, we're going to have to go down that bumpy road, but thanks for telling me because I can help smooth it out. And these are the things we can do together and plan for to best move in that direction.
And Paul, I would argue too, and this is all really good Joe. I mean, because it's so true. I mean, your institution's always up to something. But that's what makes it fun, right? Because if I had to sit on the phone all day and just talk about what form you're supposed to fill out and why you're doing something, and no. I mean, it's all like, who wants to do that kind of regulation? But what I'm finding is and this is just for this class, kind of keep that amongst yourselves, because I'm taking a different role as a speaker, right? Even though I have that HLC hat behind me, you all have your own liaisons, your own processes, but the reason you're in this class is to kind of get out of that, to think about your own futures. And if I was to leave this job, I guarantee you I could create an institution that really would be innovative. If I could write, which I'm not allowed to do because I could share too much, and it would be very difficult. And I understand why that is, but I'm here to tell you, I think it's the institutions that are holding themselves back. It's not us.
Yeah, Barbara, go ahead. Looks like you really lit up with.
Yeah, well, and that was why I had raised my hand, because Joe, you mentioned fear, and Paul, you've mentioned innovation, and I actually think it's the fear by my accrediting team at my college that stops innovation more than fear of accreditation. I think it's sometimes used as kind of an excuse not to do innovative things. Like we can't do that. HLC will never be okay with that. And then it just cuts it off. And why they do that, I don't know. Might be because they think they're responsible for the work if it comes down the way, I don't know. But I really think it's not fear of accreditation. It's fear by the team that's putting that together that causes us trouble.
And Barbara, I'd say amen to that, because here's an example of where that happened. I had a group of faculty and a college president ask if I could be around the table to really look at something innovative and new programming, and this was in New Mexico, and we did. And then I kept pushing it, and here's the accreditor, the regulator, who's saying, go farther. That's not far enough. And Joe knows I can do that. And I'm probably one of the only liaisons who do that, but I find that fun, at least for them to think about it. They said, well, we don't have the faculty for that. And I said, you don't need the faculty for that. You've got GE next door. That's your faculty. This isn't that hard. And by the way, why are you here? Go there. And I just kept pushing it. We ended up creating what I thought was truly innovative, right? And it really checked the boxes of all the stuff that they told me that they were getting from both their students and their employers. It died. It died on the Hill, and they killed it themselves. They couldn't get out of their own way. They couldn't even find a way to convince their peers that this is even doable. And that's when I started questioning as to whether or not, all the stuff and the concerns we get from presidents and people and governments that, the accreditors are really the problem here. No. It reminds me of the movie, The Call is Coming from Inside the House.
No, Barbara, Tom, there have been some of the things that I've shut down, or at least stood firm on, are these things. I remind the folks, like, accreditation's not holding us back. Like, what's holding us back in this situation is you want to push something out there, sign students up for something, and not have it fully baked. Like, you don't want to put in the front end work of developing a full blueprint for what you're talking about. This radical idea of a new pathway and this new type of credential. Well, radical pathways need radical support. We can't just roll something out and assume that typical practices, typical policies are going to support that. So we need to develop the other stuff and think those things through in order for it to be a smooth journey for the students. But when I bring that up, they're like, oh, well, we'll deal with that. I'm like, well, the nice thing I have is, well, HLC needs us to say that now.
Yeah.
And instead of them realizing, like, you're right, we should fully bake this idea before we bring in students, have them potentially take on debt for this bet we're making on a new thing, they will say, no, all right, then we'll just go a different. It's like, this wasn't a bad idea, and I'm not shutting it down, and don't feel like HLC is a barrier here, but it is reminding us that we have a responsibility. This isn't a game, and like, students are more than dollar signs. And we have to provide them a safe, secure environment, and that if we are making promises to them, we need to live up to those promises. So it is irresponsible of us to rush into anything. And that's where accreditation provides nice guardrails of trying to make sure that you're not doing anything too reckless, but they don't stand in the way.
No,
They
and
just look for
there's always ways around it, as you know, to make sure, but you have to protect students. And whether you do it in a traditional way or another way, we can find a way to make that happen. But part of the problem that I'm seeing right now, which has been going on for a while now, but there's this, now that COVID money's drying up, I get these conversations with liaisons all the time, ALOs, who will call me, and there's a new best thing, right? There's a new horizon, because now we have to find, so it's either a new program or an additional location, right? Because we've already done distance ed and that's over. I mean, that market is, we've already done adult ed. We've done all the new programming, right? So what's left? Well, let's take this show on the road and let's take it down to Florida. Florida's the key. That's where all the growth is. That's where people are, having babies, blah, blah, blah. So they say to me, we're going to open up an additional campus in Florida. And the first thing I say to them is like what Joe was saying. I said, and every good business has a plan to close. What's your closing plan? And they're like, what? I said, well, things change. So you're taking students into a 4-year program, and you're opening up in this shopping mall, which, by the way, that's the only thing left in that shopping mall. Just saying. And that's where you're going to have your class. I said, what if that building is going to be torn down to put in 55 or older little communities, which that's really kind of the future. And they said, oh, that won't happen, blah, blah, blah. Well, of course, the president resigns. The vice president is fired. The board turns over. And now they open up the books and they say, why do we have a campus in Florida? Let's close it. And then that's when the accreditor has to say, no. You said you're going to do this, right? You have to fulfill your promise. So you got to find another place. And by the way, this has now become a chic place in Fort Lauderdale. So you're going to have to pay through the nose to try to find a place in which these students can continue their education, even if you've closed it down, because you made that promise. And what did they say as a result of that conversation? It's HLC's the bad person. HLC is in the way. HLC is causing us all of this, right? No, well, HLC is protecting the students because you're not.
Any final questions or comments to Tom in our closing minutes here?
Was this useful? Was it at least entertaining?
Yes.
Always
both.
entertaining.
All entertaining and useful. Yeah.
Very good.
Keep them awake after lunch.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, really appreciate you coming, Tom. I hope it's been really helpful for people also to hear, and that's why I'm glad you were able to cut that. Even within the accreditation community and within the accreditors, there are things that, like, I think people have a perception that accreditors think they're doing everything great and that accreditation is exactly as it should be. So I think it's helpful for them to hear that, you know, it can be messy and things can come down that then, you know, come down from the feds that you all are beholden to, that it's not you having, it's, you know, if you had your choice, you wouldn't be forcing institutions to do X, Y, or Z, or implementing a new policy or process for X, Y, or Z, but you're beholden to maintain this system we're in. So hopefully it's been helpful for people to hear that too, of that, like, accreditors are critical thinkers too, and can sometimes have to swallow a bitter pill and embrace the change and best move forward.
We all have to come through it together, folks. What's coming, the future is quite unknown. But what we do know is that it's nothing like we've ever had. So therefore, that makes it frightening, and it might all end up great. It might end up, you know, somewhat of a nightmare that we're all trying to figure out. But we cannot, either side, assume we know what's coming, number one, and number two, go there alone. Okay.
Well, thanks so much, Tom, and thanks for students who were able to be here. Folks who watch online, enjoy. And
Marky, I'll see you soon.
See you in a week.
all right. Bye, everybody.